Hey woodworkers, I wanted to talk about preparing material for model making. So I have a couple of different thicknesses here that reflect the normal dimensions of wood that one could purchase. And what I've done is I've calculated the finished thickness of those dimensions. So if it's 8/4, after you've machined that, it's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 1 3/4. And if I'm going to quarter scale with my models, which is what I would recommend everybody does, 1 3/4, divided that by 4, 7/8, that becomes 7/16 of an inch in thickness here. And so the way that I did that was measured from the inside of the blade to the fence here, 7/16, and I would rip this through until I got a couple of these pieces. This is kind of a great thing to use scrap material for. I would probably not need to go out and buy material for this, but these are offcuts that, as a woodworker, I just can't seem to allow myself to get rid of. So here it is, finally having a reason to do all this. Okay, so these ones are 5/4, and then I'm going to go with the last cut here, which is going to be 4/4 material. So it's getting a little bit smaller in this realm, and I think it would make a little more sense to show you, not so much to cut these larger dimensions, but when it comes time to cut in the really fine pieces. So that's what I wanted to record. All right, so 3/4, that's 3/8, that's 3/16. So that's about what I want you to be. And truth be told, for chair making, there's probably not a great deal of material that I'm going to need to consider for 4/4. 8/4 is going to be the majority of the material, I would think, that I'll be designing and building around. But things like spindles or back splats, any of those parts of the chair that don't have to have a lot of mass. And so here we are with this. Okay, so I've raised the height of the blade, so I'm just a little bit above the thickness here. That sounds good. I'm sorry, it looks good, it sounds bad. All right, so at this point, I'll be able to run this thing through. Where is my push stick? It was here a second ago. I really wish I could find this push stick. Wouldn't that be not embarrassing? Oh, it's over here. Okay. I was using it on the jointer, that's why I couldn't find it. Okay, so straightforward here. I'm going to make this cut, and I'm going to show you another option afterwards. All right, plug your ears. I would typically make this cut with the dust collection on, but for acoustics here, I want to leave it off. Okay, so I've gotten a thin strip here, and as luck would have it, I'm pretty close. I'm a little heavy, but that will work. So there's nothing wrong with continuing down this process, and I can continue to rip this for as many of this 4/4 material that I think I would need. But I do want to show another option, because sometimes this could be a little scary to run this so close to the fence, and you always have to have a push stick in this environment, but there is another option. So I'm going to move this away from where I started with, and before I continue, I should say that to do this, I need to have these two faces parallel. So I'm working on that, and I have got to set up this little thing, which is a thin rib jig. And what I'm measuring for here is the distance. The end of this has a bearing, and then I'm measuring on the outside of the tooth that faces to my left. is about where I want you. All right, so 3/16 of an inch looks pretty good. Okay, so I've locked this thing down, but it's only holding the position of this top piece for this jig and the lower piece. I still have some options for sliding this back and forth with, which doesn't really work. What I need to do is expose this ball bearing well before the blade is engaged in the cut. So in other words, if I were to have this bearing here, I'm already engaged with this blade into this cut before I've made adjustments. So I need to set this thing back here somewhere. Same distance is maintained or held. And then that thing's not going anywhere, which is great. And so now what I'll do is I'll bring the fence over. I'm going to continue to bump this over until this board is engaged with this bearing here, which you can't see, but it has no room to wiggle laterally. And if I've done that correctly, that will expose the right dimensions here. Perfect, that looks nice. All right, let me do this cut, and we'll talk about pros and cons. Okay, so pretty straightforward. I think that motion is what most of us are used to when we are doing a rip cut. Big difference here is I didn't necessarily need to use a push stick to make this cut. I will eventually, if this is the thickness that I'm after. Let me double check here. That's right on the money. All right. So if this is the thickness I'm after, I'm not going to change my setting of this jig, but what I will do is bring the fence over until that bearing is engaged one more time, and then I'll push this all the way through, second piece, third piece, however many of these I need to cut. As long as this jig does not move, then I'm in good shape and I'll get all of these consistent. So I think there's some benefits of doing it this way. I can definitely hear a counterpoint to cutting these things off on a bandsaw, using a fence, and then running all of these things through something like a planer. I don't love the planer option because the thinner we get on the planer, there's a lot more flexibility of this material. And so running it through the planer, those lower rollers are going to push this wood up into that spinning blade. And if it's a thick enough piece, like the material that represents 8/4, there's too much thickness here. It's not really going to flex and bend. For this piece, for sure, I found that about 1/4 of an inch on most smaller planers is about the most you can hope to obtain out of a planer as far as thickness goes. Or let me rephrase that. It is the smallest dimension one can realistically expect to get out of a planer. So this was a little bit below that, so I expect that this is going to get chewed up into the planer, and I'll send boards through, but at the end, there's nothing to show for it. So anyway, so I think I would do it this way. If you have access to a drum sander or a thickness sander, that kind of changes the conversation a bit, because I could send all of these boards through regardless of the thickness, but if you've got a sharp blade, then how well prepared the surface is somewhat is irrelevant. I'm going to be cutting and shaping parts for making chairs with this, and so I don't expect to have a finished surface here, but with my blade on my machine, I just know that there's not a lot of vibration when I'm cutting, so you don't see any burn marks here. This is an easy fix with a little card scraper, possibly a little sanding. But the other part of this is I don't have a drum sander, but if there's anybody out there that would like to donate one to the cause, that would be lovely. But anyway, for what we're doing here, this would be just fine. So I will continue. I'll run probably one more of these things through. As I said, I really don't need a bunch of this thickness. Much heavier expectation here as far as the 8/4 stock. with one exception. So on this piece, I want to stop cutting the width off of this material because I will need to calculate for